So good afternoon and welcome to another edition at Barton Performance Group of Coming to the Stump. And the Stump is that place where friends and colleagues come to talk about different business issues and opportunities. My name is Rick Barton. I'm the President and CEO of Barton Performance Group. And joining me today is Allen Jarboe, the Chief Strategy and Financial Officer for CalCo Controls. Allen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rick. As Rick mentioned, CFO and CSO at CalCo. I'm also a licensed attorney and CPA. And it's been a great career. I love what I do. So this is the next stop on my journey in my career here.
Great. And we're going to be talking about change management. And for 10 minutes, we don't really expect to really solve anything, but to be able to identify what is change management, what are some tips that we would recommend, where does it work? So we'll just kind of informally talk about change management because there's a lot of people out there that do a great job in providing structure and tools, but we're just going to talk about the topic in general. So tell me about your experience with change management, Allen.
To me, it's integrated in about everything I do every day, right, in my entire career. If you're not changing, you're falling behind or dying off. So I try to integrate that into my DNA and the DNA of the companies I've been at.
Okay, and there's a lot of, like I mentioned, there's a lot of companies, a lot of authors, a lot of people have a lot to say about change management. And fundamentally, for me, change is really about what people do differently because you can change tools, you can change processes, you can put new systems in place, but if people don't do anything different, then change really hasn't occurred. So what people really embrace for me is the change.
I agree. And change is hard, right? Even for me, I feel like I thrive on it. Maybe the older I get, I don't quite as much as I did when I was younger, but I still thrive on it because we're falling behind if we're not changing. And I find for most people, it's very hard. And it's hard to interweave that into their DNA. So it's really important to approach it very carefully.
I found that when I think about change and why people struggle with change, fundamentally for me, it comes down to that people learn how to be successful. And once you change those variables or you add in some variables that would make them feel uncomfortable or no longer the expert, it's that discomfort, not knowing how to win or being in a position being perceived as less than at the top of your game. That has a lot to do with the psyche and the ability to change. So when people think about changing, they get very uncomfortable because now I may be judged differently or I'm not sure exactly what success looks like. Therefore, I'm a bit resistant.
I agree. And a lot of people, they really thrive on a fixed set of tasks and structure, right? So if you start changing those variables, it does get very uncomfortable. And it's important not to change, I think in a lot of cases, not to be methodical and structured about changing those variables, right? Because if you do it, change too many things too quickly, people get very uncomfortable with it. They don't know what to do, what's expected of them. And the change in the what you're trying to accomplish can quickly can go wrong pretty quick. It's a big topic. It's very important, and it's important to approach it with a lot of structure and planning.
I've always kind of fallen back on the saying that the only person that really enjoys change is a baby in a wet diaper. Everyone else kind of resists it from there.
And the other person I know really enjoys change is Rick Barton.
Yeah, I enjoy change. Yeah, and when you think about it, when a person is changing or organization is changing, it is uncomfortable, but it's the only time in your life where you're really learning. Rarely are you ever comfortable learning. It's getting into that zone of being uncomfortable and then feeling comfortable while uncomfortable. That's the real trick for me.
You're right. That's a great way of putting it, being comfortable while you're uncomfortable. If you've got any tricks on that or any recommended reading on that, I think the audience would really appreciate hearing that.
You know, and you can Google search it. There's a lot out there. And there's even some companies out there such as ProSci. They do a great job of breaking down a a 5 lever step to change management. Also, John Cotter wrote Leading Change and breaks it down to really some simple concepts and puts change into 3 phases: the planning phase, the execution phase, and the follow-up or continuous improvement cycle. And each one of those buckets has their own tools and toolkits associated with it to be able to ensure that, have I looked at this effectively? Am I measuring twice before I finally execute and cut? Or do I spend a little bit of planning time and then execute, and you're constantly in this cycle where you're never able to deliver effectively?
That's a great way of breaking it down into a couple of steps, and a great resource, right? Because and I think where the planning oftentimes fails is it can be a very ambiguous, right? Not concrete. You're not in the stage where you're getting results, right? So it's very easy to just, it falls off, it loses momentum, and months go by, right? And nothing's been accomplished, right? And then we all forget about it. I think it's in our DNA, again, as humans, to want to plan as little as possible and just go out and do it and execute. That's not the way effective change management works.
Absolutely. And having good tools and also having a clear vision about where you're going. I remember working with a regional CEO one time, and we were talking about this major change that was going to impact this healthcare organization. And he said, you know, Rick, I just can't seem to get people behind this. And I said, well, what we need is a burning platform. Why should they do things differently? What's in it for them? What's compelling them to change? And he looked at me and said, it was very profound. He said, it's difficult to create a burning platform when it's raining money. So, you know, where are people being incented? What's in it for them? And if there's no incentive, or it's taking something away they enjoy, the chances are they're not going to do it or want to do it easily.
That's a great story. And the time for change, effective time change management, is the time when it is raining money, right? Because as soon as it stops raining money, you're constantly behind the 8 ball, right? It's oftentimes too late. So that's the time to constantly be changing, evolving, reinventing yourself.
When you think about some of the tools associated with effective change management, what are a couple of different tools that you've used to be able to help drive change successfully in the organizations you've led?
Well, I think first it's important to break it down into actionable chunks, steps, right? It's such a broad topic. There's so many things that can be changed in an organization. If it's too big to execute on, right? It's going to fail, right? And you need to break it down oftentimes by activities or operations, right? So in the current case here, I've got a number of change management tasks that I'm working on, from streamlining the accounting and bookkeeping process to quite a bit of the operation. And they're separate tasks. They're separate change management tasks and activities that require different planning and different execution, right? So it's important to break it down into the lowest common denominator, and then plan and execute around that.
I know one thing that your company and you do really well is effective communications, and having a communication plan that engages people, lets them know what's going to happen, what is happening, what can they expect, really is a powerful driver to be able to anchor a successful change initiative.
It sure is. Communication's really key, right? Not just what needs to be changed, but why, how that's going to benefit the organization and everyone in it for this change to happen, right? And it's fluid. It can change along the way as well, right? When you start going through the planning and execution, and that's okay.
One other factor is having strong sponsorship. Who is the person that's sponsoring the initiative, or the pieces of the initiative? Who's sponsoring that? So how are they connected to the communication plan, but how are they sponsoring it? And what does that look like behaviorally? Is it what type of messaging is out there? What type of reward recognition is happening? Even creating short-term wins rather than wait for a big milestone. How do we create a bunch of short-term wins that's going to be able to fuel the initiative take it to at least the next step or the next gate or decision point?
Those are some really good points. And one, that's why it's important to break it down into lowest common denominator and steps, right? Because we all thrive on short-term satisfaction. It's great to see wins right away, hitting a lot of singles. And also having some sponsors throughout all levels of the organization, right? Because oftentimes these big strategy changes come from management or executive leadership team. And everyone below wonders why we're doing that. Why are we changing? Everything's working fine. Well, it's important to get buy-in and sponsorship and have some level of responsibility throughout all levels of the organization for it to really work.
One thing that you mentioned I thought was really key there is about dealing with resistance, because while you can sponsor an area, to expect everyone just to be on board and saying, I'm ready to go, is probably unrealistic. And yet sometimes when a change initiative is rolled out, they don't account for what type of resistance are we going to encounter, and then how do we scale it to a point that, you know, resistance is a good thing. We want people to push back. We want them to ask questions because it helps us ensure that our communication plan is clear, it's effective, it's engaging, and also identifies where's the holes in our communication. And then those people that have concerns or have issues that they want to talk about, how are we dealing with that? And that's an important part of an overall change strategy.
That's a really important part of it. And there are different types of resistance, right? There are some people that are just going to put up roadblocks and spikes in the road just for the sake of doing it and trying to, stop the process. There are other people that might be putting up resistance for different reasons. And I always welcome everyone asking questions, right? If you're not asking questions from the standpoint of having a curious mind, you never get all the issues on the table. And I don't have all the answers, and I'm the first to let everyone in my team know that I don't have all the answers. So I want that active dialogue from everyone in the company to help me come up with the best solution.
One of the things that I always enjoyed having in my staff meetings is having the first agenda item as recognition, especially during a change project where everyone's buy-in, everyone's participation is really critical and crucial. So having recognition as the first agenda item to say, who on our team should we recognize as really contributing or at least identifying roadblocks or has alternative solutions or something, but who can we recognize within the team and then maybe outside the team? Who are those people that are contributing towards our success or that are creating additional resources or aligning with the change initiatives? Who should we be recognizing? And then what does that look like?
That's a really good point, especially as these projects are underway, right? Because whether it's, I'll call it weekly meetings, that recognition is important at the beginning, and it's easy to overlook, right? I do it all the time. I started off without that recognition, and I forget most of us need it, including myself at times. And to recognize those easy wins, the accomplishments along the way, I think is really important. Otherwise, it is easy to become discouraged and deflated along the way without that recognition. Great point, Rick.
Absolutely. And I think the last thing I'd want to say is that I think that you have to train people. And one part, just not training on people on the new skills that are required, but training on how to resolve conflict, training on change management, and then having those different stakeholder groups trained on the change process itself so they can recognize the opportunities and the obstacles and then how to deal with them, how to be able to leverage them to be able to support the end goal. So how are we training our people in process, but also in behavior and then incenting that on the back end?
That's a really good summary. And I like to think of change, just as I wrap up my part of it here, is not think of it as change per se, but as a learning experience, right? I think if we can look at life more as a learning process, a learning experience, right? And think of it as an experience, not just change for the sake of it. But if we think of life more as experiences, right? That's, we're experiencing all sorts of different things all through life, right? And same in an organization. So it's really, they're new learning experiences. I think that makes it easier to swallow, at least from my perspective.
Excellent point. I think the change is really the fuel that drives organizations. Because let's face it, our customers are not going to lower their standards. They're going to want it faster, quicker, cheaper, and they're going to want the highest level of quality, which is going to require us to change constantly, how to be innovative. Because if you're not beating your customers, if you're not ahead of your competition, then you're working for your competition. It's a tough road.
It sure is. It's not easy to navigate, but we're here to help.
Absolutely. Have some great things. And if you have some ideas about change that's worked effectively on your side, we'd love to hear about it. And also any comments you have about our program. Thanks for tuning in today. It's great again seeing you, Alan, and I appreciate you talking about change management.
Great seeing you, Rick. Have a good weekend.
Take care.